All right, let's move on to the Miami Hurricanes. One of the most disappointing teams in 2022. Mario Cristobal's first year down in South Florida. They went 5-7. Lucas and I have talked a lot about Miami. We actually just posted a nice clip, a nice short on our YouTube channel about Miami. Big year for Mario Cristobal in year two. The over-under win total is 7.5 wins. Miami brought in a top 10 transfer portal class, a top 10 recruiting class. They have a new offensive coordinator. They have a new defensive coordinator. They have reworked this offensive line with some key transfers. You get Tyler Van Dyke back. I'm not going to say this is a make or break year for Mario Cristobal, but like I've told you before, year two is important for the trajectory of a program, right? Can you get the on-field results to match the recruiting hype? Can you get the on-field results to keep the boosters happy, to keep the donations going, and to keep the vibes good, right? If they go 9-3, 10-2, or 8-4, it's just so different than going 6-6 or 5-7. And I look at Miami and I just don't know how to feel about this team. Before I get to you, just reading their schedule real quick. The home games, they'll host Miami of Ohio. Lucas and I already have the Battles of Miami circled in week one. They'll play Texas A&M and Bethune-Cookman as well at home. They'll go on the road at Temple. The ACC home games are Georgia Tech, Clemson, Virginia, and Louisville. ACC road games, not easy. North Carolina, NC State, Florida State, Boston College at the end of the season. So potentially a checked-out Miami team going up to Chestnut Hill might not be the best recipe for success. Lucas, your thoughts on in my opinion, a baffling Miami Hurricanes season in 2023?
Yeah, they're hard to read as if they were last year. A lot of people were picking Miami to win the Coastal last year, to have a quick turnaround in year one. And I don't think either one of us were really super high on them. We thought
I was. I picked Miami to win the Coastal.
Okay.
I got suckered in. I distinctly remember sitting here a year ago, basically this week, saying Miami's gonna go 9 or 10 wins, and I was wrong. Moving on.
Moving on. But I actually like this Miami team a lot. I told you before the pod, I'm way too positive on way too many of these teams this year. But I think last year was just a crapshoot. They were really, really injured on the offensive line, which then curtailed to Tyler Van Dyke not playing well. He couldn't stay healthy. He missed 4 games last year, and even half the games he played in, you could just tell he just wasn't himself. And, Cristobal decided to kind of just start over again. I don't think Josh Gaddis really, really gelled with the players there, and I just don't think it was maybe a great fit. Brings in a guy like Shannon Dawson, who's going to bring a little bit more of an air raid type feel coming from Dana Holgorsen there at Houston. And I think he brings in one of the more underrated defensive coordinators in Lance Guthrie, who put together really, really good defenses at Marshall the last 2 years. Last year, they were top 10 in scoring defense up there. And you mentioned it, a revamped offensive line. They bring back a guy like Zion Nelson, who was a first-team ACC player back in 2021 at left tackle. He missed last year due to injury. He's back. They also, you mentioned a couple of the transfers. Matt Lee from UCF was an All-American Athletic Conference guy last year. Listening on some pods for Miami, they think he might be the best center in the conference. They really, really like him. They also brought in Javion Cohen, who started over 25 games with Alabama. I think maybe the biggest question mark will be kind of similar to Clemson, is who's really going to elevate there at wide receiver. They didn't really have a ton of production in that group last year. I think the leading receiver was only at like 400 or so yards. Their leading receiver was their tight end, Will Mallory. He's gone. So I think wide receiver, they bring a lot of those guys back. They bring in Tyler Harrell, who 2 years ago had a nice year at Louisville, barely played last year at Alabama. So they should be better at the front lines, might be able to run the ball a little bit more, which should help Tyler Van Dyke. I think maybe the bigger question is, what the heck is this defense going to look like? This defense was bad last year. I mean, they gave up 45 points to Middle Tennessee State. They got absolutely crushed by Florida State and looked like they just kind of gave up towards the end of the season. Like we mentioned, new DC. They have a couple nice pieces in like Leonard Taylor and Akeem Messidor there on the defensive line who had productive seasons for them in or back. But they do lose some guys on the back end. So I think defensively is might be where I have my defensively and wide receiver, I think, is where I have
Yeah.
my biggest question marks.
Yeah, it's a defense that allowed over 40 points in 5 games, including in Middle Tennessee. They do bring back, I think, a pair of safeties that they really like in Cameron Kitchens, who had 6 interceptions last year. James Williams as well. You mentioned Akeem Messidor, Jafari Howard combined for 12 and a half sacks last year for them. Leonard Taylor, former 5-stars, back as well. On the defensive line, you do lose your 2 starting cornerbacks. Tariq Stevenson, I think, was a second-round pick, and then I think DJ Ivey was a 5th or 6th-round pick. My question is, because I wrote down the same thing. On my notes, I said, what did I say? I said questions at skill positions, but offense is moving to the air raid, and I think that is going to help Tyler Van Dyke. Hey, man, throw to a spot. Let's get our guys in space. Let's get the athletes that we should have being in South Florida. Get the ball in their hands, get them in space. And it felt like the coordinators last year, Josh Gaddis and Kevin Steele, were almost more of a flashy, let's get big names and throw money around hires. And Mario Cristobal realized that didn't work. And let's hire some proven G5 good coordinators, right? Lance Guidry, you mentioned, I thought was a really nice under-the-radar move, getting him from Marshall. And then, getting Shannon Dawson from Houston. Houston's obviously now a Power 5 school, but, one of the better schools in the American the last handful of years. So I expect this team to be improved. This is like I said, top 10 transfer portal class, top 10 overall recruiting class. You mentioned the offensive line. It sounds like they're going to go Zion Nelson left tackle, Cohen at left guard, Matt Lee at center, potentially one of the star true freshmen at right tackle for them. So interesting to see there. The over-under at FanDuel is 7.5 wins. Over is plus 138. The under is minus 170. ACC schedule, I'll mention it one more time quickly. Georgia Tech, Clemson, Virginia, Louisville at home. Temple, they get North Carolina, NC State, Florida State, Boston College on the road. I'm taking under 7.5 wins for Miami. I just need to see it. I need to see Miami get 8 wins. I think you lost a lot from last year's team, and certainly you might get a healthy Tyler Van Dyke. You might get a healthy Zion Nelson. We don't know what the defense is going to be. I think they will be improved. I think this is a 7-5 team. I just lean 7-5 more than 8-4 because I want to see it. This is Tyler Van Dyke's 3rd offensive coordinator in 3 years. It's a new defense, and I want to know, is the culture really going to be reset, or is this going to take another year of bringing your guys in and kind of weeding the bad eggs out? So I went under for Miami. What say you? Are you on the over train again?
We're back. We're back on the train. Yeah. I'm going over on 7.5.
Lucas apparently is going to have every team in the ACC win 9 games. Somehow he's going to maneuver the schedule.
They're just going to win all their non-conference games. That's just like what's going to happen. So they're going to need to at this point for me to look smart at all. But no, I think 7.5, slightly low number for them. I think they are going to be better on offense. You mentioned, I think you made a great point. Just the air raid system just might be a better simplified system for Tyler Van Dyke. I also think, on defense, I think one of the big impact transfers is going to be Francis Maniguel from Wazoo. Was one of the better linebackers in the Pac-12 last year. He's transferring over to play with his brother, who might be starting on the offensive line. But just kind of looking at that and the way the schedule sets up, they don't play Clemson. But they get A&M, but that game is at home. That's going to be a toss-up for both of those teams. I think if you take the over for one of those teams, you're sweating that game. So, but I think they're much closer to 8-4 and 7-5. So that is why I'm going with the over.
All right, the Pittsburgh Panthers, a 9-win season in 2022, 5-3 in the ACC. They went 8-4 in the regular season. They beat UCLA in the Sun Bowl. For Pittsburgh, it's going to be a lot of new faces. Returning production only 51%, 119th in the country, 49% on defense, 52% on offense. Lucas, since 2019, the Pittsburgh Panthers 34 victories, second only to Clemson in that span. They were the 2021 ACC champions. You've had a Bolitnikoff winner. You've had a first-round quarterback. It's just really, really impressive stuff from Pat Narduzzi the last handful of years. This might be the year where you say, all right, can you sustain it? You had a really good, 2-3 year run. With you had Kadon Slovis last year, obviously 2021, you won the ACC with Jordan Addison and with Kenny Pickett. Both those guys ended up being first round draft picks. Offense brings in Phil Dracovic from Boston College. You lose your leading rusher, Israel Abinikonda. Over 1,400 yards last year for him. I'm not going to say it again. Sorry. Rewind the pod if you have to. Lucas, when you look at this Pitt team, they lost a lot from last year. I mean, you're talking about 4 of your top defensive linemen with from snap count, top 3 leaders in sacks, your leading tackler, Servassier Dennis, Kalijah Casey, or Talijah Cansey was a first-round draft pick from Tampa Bay. It's going to be a test for Pat Narduzzi to see, can you sustain this level of success? Because, Pitt's been one of the top 4 or 5 programs in the conference the last handful of years.
Yeah, no, and you talk about the offense and losing some guys. I don't think they were too sad when Kadon Slovis was leaving. It felt like they are. I believe Phil Dracovic pretty much committed there before Slovis even entered the transfer portal. So they were clearly looking to make another move at that position. Dracovic obviously has a lot of familiarity with Pitt's offensive coordinator, Frank Cignetti Jr., who was at Boston College when Dracovic had arguably his best years there. So I think there's going to be a familiar factor. He's going to be playing behind a heck of a lot better offensive line than he had at Boston College. We talked about the offensive issues that Brennan Armstrong had at Virginia. It was just as bad, if not worse, at Boston College. That offensive line was an issue, but even though they lost, Marcus Minor, who was a first-team All-ACC guard last year, they do return 3 starters, combined 84 starts between them. This has been an offensive line that's been pretty good, even with some turnover over the last few years. You mentioned, Israel Abanikonda, or Izzy. I was supposed to say we could just call him Izzy. The rest of the pod
I like
brings
that.
him up. They do got to replace him, obviously Jared Wayne, but I do. They really, really like Rodney Hammond, who had 460 yards last year. I think he had over 100 yards against UCLA in their bowl game. And they do bring, even though Jared Wayne's gone, their next top 3 wide receivers, including Kanata Mumfield, who had over 500 yards last year, is back there too. So I think they could make some strides. This wasn't a great offense last year. They were only 50th in FBS in total scoring. I think that the biggest thing will be defensively. You mentioned some of the losses that they had. Can they continue to replace this? We know Narduzzi's a defensive guy. He's put a ton of guys in the league as time at Michigan State and then also here at Pitt. Can they kind of continue that factory? They do have, AJ Woods and MJ Devonshire are both back in that secondary. That should be probably the strength of this team. But I do think they're going to refill, and I think they're going to take a step forward. I think Dracovic finds a little bit better form, and I think this will be an interesting team. Phil Steele actually has Pitt as his 3rd best team in the ACC. So I am intrigued to see, because like you said, if they do this for a 3rd year in a row, I think that shows a lot about how Pat Narduzzi has elevated Pitt from just maybe like a regular bowl team to a team that can maybe sneak up and compete for an ACC title here and there.
Yeah, the schedule I think is pretty manageable here. Here's the conference schedule. At home, you get Louisville, Florida State, Boston College, and North Carolina. On the road, Virginia Tech, Wake Forest, Syracuse, and Duke. The non-conference at home, you get Wofford and Cincinnati. You go on the road at West Virginia in a rematch of last year's epic backyard brawl game. That was, I think, the Thursday game,
Mm-hmm.
week one. It was awesome. And then you also play at Notre Dame. So 3 Power 5 opponents, 2 Big 12 opponents, and Notre Dame. For Pitt, the over-under win total at FanDuel, 6.5 wins. The over, minus 192. The under is plus 154. I'm taking the over. Um, for all the reasons you said, this is just a program. I think Phil Dracovic at very least is an upgrade. I think I like some of the guys in this offense. Rodney Hampton. They bring in LSU transfer Derek Davis. I think those will be the running backs. Dijon Reynolds comes in from Florida with Kanata Mumfield and Bub Means, and I think you just trust Pat Narduzzi's defensive development. You just trust that they're going to be able to put out defensive linemen. They've had at least 46 sacks as a team in 4 straight seasons. Like they're just able to put out guys that are first or second round draft picks in the NFL. So I'm going to take over Pitt. I think 7-5 is very manageable.
Yeah, the same way. Over for me, kind of like with Dave Zorn. I think Pat Narduzzi's just in that mold. Like, probably wake up and they're probably at worst going to be 7-5 during the regular season because they're going to play usually pretty good defense to keep them in games, and Pat wants to run the ball whether they're good at it or not. He's going to want to run it. So I think 7-5 I think is kind of the floor for them too. So I am taking the over as well.